What's up, guys? It's Ken over here at Backbodymystery. Today I'm doing a review on He Who Remains. He Who Remains first made his appearance in Thor issue 245 in 1966. So before I get started, slap that subscribe button, like and share. Follow my other social media platforms in the description. So today we're going to be going over a quick story time, and I got my special guest Ida here that's going to narrate the story. So let's get started.
Defeating his variants. Once upon a time, while living on Earth in the 31st century, Nathaniel Richards, who was a scientist, discovered the existence of the multiverse, which consisted of alternate universes and alternate versions of himself. He caused them to meet each other, leading to them sharing their knowledge and technology with one another, creating a temporary peace. During this time, he also created an AI he named Miss Minutes to serve as his assistant and chess partner. Knowing that Miss Minutes was capable of more, he allowed her to write her own code, though consistently denied her a body. Some of the variants, such as Kang the Conqueror, saw the alternate universes as places to rule over, thus starting the Multiversal War. During the war, Richards had a variant of Rebecca Terminet, who he named Ravonna Renslayer, leading his army. He discovered a monster created from the rifts of space-time, who he dubbed Alioth, and harnessed his power to defeat his variants, ending the war. Preserving peace. Isolating a collection of timelines that followed the same baseline, which he titled the Sacred Timeline, he wrote a strict script to be followed, eliminating branches that did not follow his script for the Sacred Timeline. He Who Remains also created the Temporal Loom, a device created to manage and eventually delete branch timelines if they had not been pruned in time as a failsafe to ensure the Sacred Timeline's existence. Now operating under the moniker He Who Remains, he created the Time Variance Authority, or TVA, to govern and protect it from being overrun by his surviving variants. He captured variants from branch timelines and erased their memories of their lives, brainwashing them to serve as employees of the TVA, including positions such as field agents and analysts, and instilling in them the desire to prune rogue timelines and preserve multiversal peace. Under his new rule, he worked along Ravonna Renslayer to help run the TVA, with its employees aware that they were working for him. He Who Remains located an asteroid at the end of time and established a castle there called the Citadel at the end of time, from which he watched over the sacred timeline. As the Citadel neared completion, Renslayer and He Who Remains admired it and their mission. He Who Remains complimented Renslayer's efforts in the war and declared his pride to lead alongside her. Renslayer opened a time door to the Time Variance Authority office and noted that the organization was awaiting commands. He Who Remains said that he would catch up and let her go through the time door alone. He Who Remains then summoned Miss Minutes and ordered her to initiate one of its protocols, which would erase all memories and traces of him from the TVA and its employees. Miss Minutes hesitantly agreed and followed out the door, and He Who Remains silently apologized to Renslayer. He then created the 3 android timekeepers to publicly serve as the TVA founders. He also tasked Miss Minutes to create false history of the TVA as propaganda. Attack on the Citadel. Millennia later, He Who Remains grew tired of his endless work and responsibility and wanted to find a new successor. He guided a Loki variant that he allowed to exist, as well as a female Loki variant named Sylvie, through their adventures and paved their road leading to him. However, knowing what Sylvie had planned for him, He Who Remains created a contingency plan, a portion of which included having Miss Minutes create a Victor Timely variant in 1868, which he informed her about. When Loki and Sylvie approached his castle, he invited them in to speak with him. When Sylvie called him He Who Remains, he laughed that Miss Minutes was still referring to him as that, but said that he liked the name. He tried to speak with Loki and Sylvie in the elevator, but Sylvie was too intent on revenge and tried to kill him repeatedly. However, he evaded her using his temp pad and transported himself to his office. He invited Loki and Sylvie into his office to sit down in chairs in front of his table and offered them drinks. Eventually, the duo sat down and he told them that he knew everything that would happen, showing them a printed transcript of the very dialogue they had just uttered. He then told them about the history about his variants, the Multiversal War, Alioth, and why he created the TVA. He informed the pair that not all of his variants were like him, with some being evil and bent on conquering realities. He informed Loki and Sylvie that their recent actions leading to him had been designed by him, including their adventures on Lamentis I and in the Void, and that he wanted to be sure that it was them who could take his place. Claiming that he was much older than he looked and was tired, he asked them to take his place to be in charge of the TVA and to oversee the protection of the sacred timeline. He offered them two choices: kill him and let the sacred timeline expand into the multiverse, thereby letting his variants wreak havoc before he eventually returned in some form, or become his successors and ultimately the leaders of the TVA. However, not truly intending to die at Sylvie's hand, He Who Remains enacted his secret contingency plan. After thunder crackled above, he told Loki and Sylvie that they had just crossed the threshold and lied to the pair about telling them that he was no longer able to determine the future. He Who Remains then witnessed Sophie and Loki duel each other as Loki was trying to stop her from immediately killing He Who Remains. He witnessed as the two Loki variants kissed before Sylvie used He Who Remains Tempad to throw Loki out of the Citadel through a time door. Unbeknownst to Sylvie, He Who Remains had arranged her to commit this very action as it granted Loki the ability to time slip with, in conjunction with his order to have Miss Minutes create a Victor Timely variant, served as his contingency plan to be resurrected. He Who Remains then told Sophie that he was impressed before she threw his table aside and stabbed him in the chest. He winked at her, however, and cryptically told her that he would see her soon, before laughing and dying.
There you have it, guys. That's the first part of the story. I hope you were entertained by that, and check out part 2 in the description below, and I'll catch you guys next time. What's up, guys? It's Ken here with Backbodymystery, and we're back again to complete part 2 of Storytime. So just a quick little recap. He Who Remains made his first appearance in Thor issue 245 in 1966. So we're going to get right back into it. I'm going to pass it over to my narrator, which is my special guest, Ida. Let's get started.
With He Who Remains' death, the sacred timeline was reconnected to the greater multiverse, and numerous branching realities were rapidly created, which allowed the Council of Kangs to gain access to the sacred timeline. As Kang the Conqueror was killed during a fight with Ant-Man, the Council concluded that the heroes got too close to destroying the dynasty they had built. The Council and every variant of theirs in existence to assemble in order to stop them. Loki found himself in the past of the Time Variance Authority, aka TVA, which only sped up the creation of branching timelines. Loki's experience with He Who Remains left a big impact on him, as he went on to describing He Who Remains as a dangerous and terrifying figure. As he and Mobius M. Mobius traveled to the branch timeline where the Victor Timely variant resided, Loki became fearful at the prospect of Timely being as dangerous as He Who Remains. Posthumous plans. As He Who Remains' body began to decompose in his chair, the TVA stopped pruning branch timelines, causing the temporal loom to overlay. At the same time, Loki began time slipping, an affliction granted to him by He Who Remains that had the trickster god uncontrollably transported across various points of time, while Miss Minutes set out to enact her role in He Who Remains' contingency plan. Amassing a file on Victor Timely's whereabouts, she arranged for Ravonna Renslayer to meet with her in 1868 in Chicago, where Timely, who was He Who Remains' sacred timeline counterpart, resided. He Who Remains' orders consisted of the pair giving the TVA official handbook to Timely as a child, thereby creating a branched timeline and rendering the version of Timely who received the book as a variant who would study the science of the TVA. Miss Minutes and Renslayer believed that He Who Remains' intent was to have this Timely variant become his successor. However, when Timely rejected Miss Minutes' advances, she decided not to honor He Who Remains' wishes and chose to turn on Timely. Additionally, Miss Minutes showed Renslayer a video of He Who Remains ordering her memories to be wiped. This resulted in Renslayer joining Miss Minutes in the belief that He Who Remains did not deserve to have his variant becoming his successor, and thus chose to go against He Who Remains' contingency plans by deciding to rule over the TVA instead. Unbeknownst to them, He Who Remains had arranged for this very scenario, as his true intent for the creation of the Timely variant was not for Timely to work with Renslayer and Miss Minutes to become his successor. Instead, the true plan was for Timely to be recruited by Loki and the TVA as a means to fix the temporal loom, knowing full well that Timely would not succeed and that the destruction of several realities would prompt Loki to time slip before Sylvie killed him, thereby resurrecting him. Brief resurrection. With Victor Timely unable to scale the temporal loom to handle infinite branches, despite Loki having lived through centuries and having rewound time multiple times, Loki came to the conclusion that the only way to protect reality was to prevent Sylvie from killing He Who Remains. Loki then time slipped back to the Citadel at the end of time before Sylvie could kill him, thereby resurrecting He Who Remains in the temporal sense and fulfilling He Who Remains' true contingency plan. Loki attempted to convince Sylvie not to kill He Who Remains, although she refused to listen and stabbed He Who Remains. Loki then rewound time and unsuccessfully failed to convince Sylvie again, and continued to rewind time after each failed attempt in order to resurrect He Who Remains. Loki eventually asked He Who Remains why he sat by and watched Sylvie try to kill him without bothering to defend himself. He Who Remains then used his tent pad to freeze Sylvie in time and asked Loki how many times had he rewound time trying to save him. When Loki expressed shock at Sylvie being frozen, He Who Remains replied that he was surprised that Loki hadn't gained that ability yet. He Who Remains then divulged that he had paved the road for Loki to gain his time-slipping ability for the sole purpose of resurrecting him, disclosing that he never intended for Sylvie to permanently kill him, and adding that everything that Loki had gone through of late was part of the contingency plan that he had paved to ensure his return. Noting Loki's lack of retort, He Who Remains told Loki that since this was too much for the trickster god to process, he would restore Sylvie's agency, and that perhaps after a couple thousand more loops, Loki would be ready to have a conversation. However, Loki then paused time on Sylvie, not only revealing that he indeed had that ability, but that they had already had this conversation. Impressed, He Who Remains smiled and claimed that Loki was his favorite of the two variants in front of him. As Loki took a seat, He Who Remains notified Loki that he was well aware of Victor Timely's inability to fix the temporal loom. He Who Remains explained that the temporal loom was never intended to handle all the branch timelines, but a failsafe that would delete all of the branches, the TVA included, in order to save the sacred timeline. He Who Remains then added that his variants were already out there in the multiverse. Loki declared that he would destroy the loom before it could delete the branches and destroy the TVA, although He Who Remains reminded him that the loom prevented a brutal war from breaking out, where all realities, including the sacred timeline, would be destroyed. He Who Remains implored Loki to see reason, claiming that Loki had known peace in his life because He Who Remains had presided at the end of time, and that he got to rule over the timeline because he was capable of making the tough choices. When Loki once again declared that he would find another way, He Who Remains informed Loki that he would have to make one of two tough choices: allow Sylvie to kill him, thereby leading to the scenario where the loom becomes overloaded and allows for a multiversal war where they would all die, or kill Sylvie so that he and Loki could work together to protect the sacred timeline. However, Loki chose to time slip away from the Citadel, eventually returning to the point in time before the loom exploded. In doing so, Loki restored history to the version where Sylvie had killed He Who Remains, thereby undoing He Who Remains' resurrection. Dethroned by Loki. Having returned to the TVA office right before the temporal loom exploded, Loki decided to forge a third option for himself, where he would destroy the loom itself, releasing the infinite branches of the multiverse from its grip. As the branches began to die, Loki used his magic to revive them before transporting them, along with himself, to the Citadel at the end of time. Loki then sat upon He Who Remains' throne and chose to hold the branches of the universe, or the multiverse, himself for all time, allowing both the sacred timeline and the branch timelines to coexist while giving the TVA a chance to defend themselves against the variants of He Who Remains, who would one day arrive. The end.
There you have it, guys. Hope you enjoyed that story time with my special guest narrator, Ida. Slap, like, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time.